Hello and welcome to Insane Heists and Robberies, the show where we take a magnifying glass to humanity's most daring, devious, and downright dumbass attempts at getting rich quick without any of that work nonsense. As usual, I am your host, 𝔻𝕉𝕗, your often sarcastic and always lurking guide through history's greatest criminal facepalms. Today we're going way back, to 1950, to a much simpler time when people trusted their banks, smoked indoors, and considered eating mayonnaise on everything a personality trait. Now for today's crime, we take a deep dive into the Great Brinks Robbery, also known as the crime of the century, which is pretty impressive considering the century was only halfway over, and we hadn't even invented Watergate, Enron, or even NFTs. Part 1. The Ocean's 7, but without the cool Clooney plan. Now, today is January 17th, 1950, in Boston, Massachusetts on the North End. It's just before 7 p.m., the kind of night where you grab a coat, a hat, and maybe a Tommy gun or two, for casual errands. 7 men dressed like they were going to a casting call for unimpressive Navy drama. They walked into a Brinks armored car depot. Now these fellas, they were wearing matching Navy peacoats, chauffeur hats, rubber Halloween-style masks, and more cologne than a mob wedding. Imagine if Sears catalog models decided to go rogue. Inside, 5 unsuspecting employees are tied up with the same efficiency that you would expect from people who spent about 2 years planning this casual caper. And apparently, they did not budget time for pleasantries. The robbers steal $2.775 million. That's over $30 million today, or in modern terms, enough for a decent down payment on a 1-bedroom apartment in Chicago. They didn't just grab cash, no, they grabbed everything. Checks, money orders, securities, basically any piece of paper that might convert into "I am going to disappear to Cuba" funds. And they vanished into the cold Boston night without a trace. And here's the kicker. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment stick-up. This was 2 years in the planning. 2 years in the making. Casing, testing, rehearsing. They made duplicate keys, noted every staff change, mapped the security schedule, and probably knew the janitor's coffee order. Leading the crew was one Anthony Fats Pino. We'll get deep into him later, which is either a mob boss or Looney Tunes villain type name. The kind of guy whose criminal resume probably just said, "I yell, I plan, I eat cannoli." If these guys had invested this kind of energy into, say, opening a deli, we'd be talking about the great pastrami empire of 1950. But no, instead we get a heist that somehow didn't end in total disaster. I mean, at least not right away. Part 2. The getaway and let's not spend anything for 6-year plan. So, they pull it off. Boom. In and out in under 30 minutes. No injuries, no gunshots, no alarms. It was, by all definitions and accounts, a perfect crime. And of course, they knew that the hard part wasn't robbing the place. It was staying quiet afterwards. So, what did they do, you ask? Well, they waited. And I don't mean like a weekend I mean, they waited 6 full years. That's right. These clowns actually agreed to sit on millions of dollars and not spend a dime for 6 years. No flashy cars, no beachfront houses, no flexing at the club, just a bunch of crooks with giant piles of cash stuffed into heaters, mattresses, and who knows where else. These blokes were trying to live like broke saints until the statute of limitations ran out. Because, fun fact, if you don't get charged within a certain time, you really can't be prosecuted. It's basically crime's version of calling no tagbacks. But waiting is hard, especially when you have a guy named Specs in your crew. Let's talk about him. Part 3. The FBI has no clue until Specs gets mad and started snitching. For years, the FBI chased shadows. They had nothing. No fingerprints, no witnesses, not even a solid lead. I mean, you can almost hear the sound of J. Edgar Hoover's forehead vein throbbing. They interrogated every career criminal in New England. They set up tip lines. They even dragged in psychics. Because nothing says we're out of ideas like asking Madame Zelda if she's got a hunch. The robbers had done everything right. Gloves? Check. Masks? Yep. Zero respect for overtime workers? Absolutely. But then, the snitch, Joseph Specs O'Keefe, happened. Specs, named for his glasses and probably because Creepy Joe was taken, had a falling out with the crew. After a stint in prison and narrowly dodging a hit attempt by his own teammates, friendship goals. He had a bit of a revelation. Snitching sounds better than getting got. And boy, did he snitch. Specs didn't just tell the FBI what happened. He gave them a play-by-play. Names, dates, getaway cars, hideouts. He practically handed them a DVD commentary. And once the feds had that info, it was game over. They arrested 8 of the 10 men involved. Some confessed, others tried to weasel out, but the trial was inevitable. The perfect crime? More like a perfectly delayed disaster. So, you ask, where's the money? Well, despite multiple arrests, trials, and enough media hype to make it crime of the century material, most of the money was literally never recovered. Only a fraction was ever even found, in a few bundles here, a stash in a heating vent there. But what about the rest? Virtually gone? Maybe it's buried. Maybe it was burned. Maybe someone used it to buy a small Caribbean island, now known as definitely not stolen money K. But it's still missing, meaning somewhere out there, someone could be living their best life off money stolen in 1950. Or maybe they blew it all in a horse racing and smokes. Because again, it's 1950. So, what have we learned? Spoiler, not much. So what's the takeaway? If you're gonna rob an armored depot, maybe don't include a guy named Specs with abandonment issues. Never trust a criminal named Fats to retire quietly. And if your plan requires 10 people keeping a secret for 6 years, it's not a plan. It's a ticking time bomb made of testosterone and poor judgment. So now I'm going to give you the backgrounds Now for a little more information on Fats. The Great Brinks robbery left its mark not just because of how bold it was, but because of how close it came to actually working. If it weren't for one disgruntled glasses-wearing stool snitch pigeon, we might be calling it the crime of the century that actually got away with it. Now, Anthony Fats Pino was the self-proclaimed criminal mastermind behind the Great Brinks robbery, because when you're plotting one of the biggest heists in U.S. history, who better to lead than a guy whose nickname screams meatball magnet more than master tactician? Now, Fats was born in Italy and raised in Pennsylvania. Pino had a long rap sheet and a longer history of low-level criminal activity, dabbling in everything from bootlegging to burglary. Like he was collecting crimes the way other kids collect baseball cards. By the 1940s, he'd relocated to Boston and surrounded himself with a crew of misfits and small-time hoods who somehow managed not to screw things up for a while. He spent 2 years obsessively planning the Brinks heist, casing the building, copying keys, and orchestrating every detail like a man who took Ocean's 11 personally. Even though that movie didn't exist yet. But despite his careful planning, the whole thing eventually unraveled, thanks to one of his own guys flipping under the pressure and snitching, because apparently loyalty is not included in the price of a few fake Navy peacoat. The background on Joseph James Snitch O'Keefe. Nickname for his spectacles and not spiritual wisdom, was your archetypal career crook who somehow thought 6 years of silence was a brilliant investment strategy. Born and bred in Boston's criminal underbelly, Specs had already dipped his toes into burglary before the Brinks gig. He and Stanley Gus Gasoria were the inside guys who picked the locks with ice picks and temporary lock swabs, like they were auditioning to be a real-life locksmith. After the successful heist, $2.775 million in cash and securities, a record-shattering sum for 1950. Specs did the responsible thing. He got arrested for a completely unrelated burglary in Pennsylvania, which landed his goofy ass a 3-year jail term and let his share of the loot sit with his buddies. And they apparently treated it like Monopoly money. When he demanded his cut, his cohorts repeatedly shorted him, lost it, or spent it defending themselves. It's a real return on friendship, I guess. That little domestic wrinkle made Specs so suspicious and broke that he threatened to squeal. His warning wasn't exactly met with brotherly love. Oh no. They hired a hitman, because that's what you do when your homie's about to snitch. Elmer Trigger Burke enters the stage to take care of him. Spoiler alert. He survived a dramatic shootout in Dorchester, and the FBI swooped in faster than you can say rat. On January 6, 1956, just 5 days before the statute of limitations expired, Specs got cold feet about jail time and spilled the beans. His testimony put 8 men away for life. Meanwhile, he walked out with a 4-year sentence and was free by 1960. Talk about timing. Post-prison Specs tried the straight life, working as a seaman, liquor store clerk, building custodian, even Cary Grant's chauffeur. Allegedly. He drifted until 1976, living under multiple aliases, haunted by his own choices, and died of a heart attack at the age of 67. In short, Specs was the guy who picked locks, picked fights, picked a lousy crew, then picked a moment to flip that resurrected the Brinks case. Proof that sometimes the glasses-wearing guy in the room is the one you want to trust the least, or maybe the one worth trusting. Now we'll do some more background on our designated dipshit criminals. For this story, we begin with the background on Joseph Big Joe McGinnis, because Medium Order Joe just didn't carry the same menace, was the so-called architect behind the 1950 Great Brinks robbery. Born into Boston's seedy underworld, McGinnis had a rap sheet thicker than a dystopian novel, with convictions for robbery and narcotics, and that's before he even considered a multi-million-dollar heist. According to the snitchopotamus Specs O'Keefe, McGinnis wasn't just a figurehead. He was the guy who pulled the trigger on disposing of the guns, torching the getaway truck, and shredding the incriminating clothes. Legend has it that on the night of the robbery, while everyone else was storming the vault, McGinnis was having dinner and an alibi with none other than a Boston cop at his own liquor store. Impeccably timed, except for the minor detail that the getaway truck was later found in pieces near his pal Specs' home. Arrested in January 1956, alongside the rest of the crew, McGinnis spent the rest of his days behind bars, going all religious nut and crafting leather wallets while awaiting a life sentence. He never escaped. He died in Walpole Prison on October 5th, 1966. So yes, this is the gentleman whose grand plan netted nearly $2.8 million, and who wound up trading profit for penitentiary leather accessories. Now we move on to Adolph Jazz Maffei, because Dole Joe wouldn't sell any movie rights. He was the muscle in the Brinks crew, with just enough charm and background noise to be considered somewhat entertaining. Born and raised in Boston's underworld, Maffei helped plot the heist right from his own living room, proving that grand criminal schemes often begin with a comfy sofa and some strong Italian coffee. After the heist, Maffei enjoyed a lavish 6-year spree, blowing an estimated $89 grand of his cut, gambling and at the racetracks. Because why build an empire when you can lose it all by Monday? He was convicted on tax evasion charges, because even crooks pay the tax man eventually. He ended up with a life sentence that was later commuted, and by 1969 he was out, back to the Quincy suburbs, selling used cars and lunching like a local celeb, until his death in 1988. So yes, Jazz Maffei, part criminal, part gambler, full-time cautionary tale that being cool doesn't pay your electric bill, or even make you rich. Now on to Thomas Sandy Richardson, because Beach Boy didn't fit Boston's North End vibe. He was one of the semi-active participants in the 1950 robbery. The guy apparently smart enough to wear a chauffeur cap and peacoat, but not smart enough when it came to spending his share. Born into the same gritty underworld as the rest, Sandy was part of the group that tied up the employees and spent 20 brisk minutes looting the vault, nabbing his millions. But they did leave behind over $1 million in silver and coins, because, hey, who wants to carry all that literal heavy metal? After the heist, Sandy joined the 6-year statute of limitations watch club, spending his loot mainly on booze and racetrack bets while trying to keep a low profile. He fled after the crew was busted in 1956, landing on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, only to get pinched in May, hiding in Dorchester, a revolver in hand and 5,000 in coins jingling in his pocket. He was sentenced to life. He served over 14 years and was paroled in August 1970. His share was around 83,000. As you guessed, mostly squandered. He then limped back to life as a dock worker, famously telling reporters crime does not pay, while sweeping floors, proving sometimes your greatest heist ends with a broom and an ironic gin. Sandy's story is a comic tragedy, part gangster swagger, part tragic gambler, complete with the sweet irony that Sandy wound up slogging it through life, one crane lift at a time. Now the background on Vincent Costa, because disturbingly, Rooftop Flashlight Guy didn't have the same ring to it. He was the lookout extraordinaire for the 1950 robbery. He was stationed on a neighboring rooftop with a flashlight and a misguided Semaphore operator. As Anthony Fats Pino's brother-in-law, Costa apparently earned trust with family ties and the ability to flick a light at the perfect moment. 5 aborted runs later, he finally hit the jackpot signal that launched one of America's largest heists. He served 15 years before being paroled in 1969, only to crash back into crime headlines. In 1985, this time caught trafficking cocaine with 3 ounces stashed in his shirt worth around $7,000 while running a watch repair side hustle, because nothing says better life choices like swapping rooftop signals for pocket-sized drug deals. He was again paroled. Then Costa faded into relative obscurity, but his story remains a cautionary tale. Crime may not pay, but its sequel always stops by your old zip code. Now on to Michael Vincent Geoghegan, because Vinnie Jean apparently sounded more like a mafia pasta dish than the mastermind. He was another one of the 7 men who swaggered into the Brinks depot on January 17th, in chauffeur caps, rubber masks, brandishing revolvers, and the kind of misplaced confidence only career criminals truly master. But Geoghegan wasn't just a one-night wonder. His criminal record stretches back to the age of 8, when he got his first run-in for property damage. By 1924, he was doing time for armed robbery, and he'd been in and out of the system ever since, including a suspicious stint in flying lessons, because every heist needs a potential getaway pilot, am I right? After the Brinks robbery, he stayed cozy with his crew, helped loot nearly $2.8 million, and then joined the world's worst silent retreat for 6 years, waiting on the statute of limitations. Unsurprisingly, he was nabbed in January 1956 with the others and slapped with a life sentence, though he eventually walked free on parole in 1969, but not before starring in a courtroom drama, photos that immortalized him looking fabulous in handcuffs. proof that even lifelong criminals can have an eye for aesthetics. So yes, Geoghegan's life was a non-stop carousel of vandalism, armed robbery, attempted escape artistry, or at least flight training, and eventually a parole board's magical pardon. Just another day in the clean life of a lifelong crook. Next, we move on to Henry Harry Baker, because Slick was already taken. Now, he was one of the 7 men who stormed, like all the others, on January 17, 1950, dressed like a bargain bin Navy recruit, armed with a revolver and a goofy rubber mask. Now, you may ask, what was his role? Well, since you asked, he was among the crew that tied up the employees and made off with the cash. Now, Baker's criminal resume was lengthy, but it was unimpressive. With a history of petty crimes that culminated in this heist, after the robbery, he spent 6 years in the shadows, waiting for that damned old statute of limitations to expire. But just as he thought he'd gotten away with it, the whole gang got arrested in 1956, thanks to an informant, the snitch we spoke about earlier, who decided to spill the beans just days before that statute ran out. Dang. Baker was sentenced to life in prison but died behind bars. He died in 1961 at the young age of 54. So yes, Baker's legacy is a cautionary tale. Even if you manage to steal millions, your criminal career can still end with a whimper, not a bang. Now on to James Jimmy Fowarty. Because Stealthy was already taken, he was one of the men in the crew. He was also dressed like a bargain bin Navy recruit with a rubber mask and a penchant for revolvers. What was his role? Well, he is one of the others who tied up the employees, then made off with the cash. Apparently, carrying metal wasn't part of the plan. Fowarty's criminal resume was as lengthy as unimpressive as the criminal that I mentioned before. Not too much else is known on him. So we'll skip on to Joseph Big Joe McGinnis, because Little Joe was already taken. He was supposedly the actual mastermind behind the heist. McGinnis had a long history of criminal activity, including armed robbery and burglary, and he was known for his violent tendencies. After the heist, he managed to evade capture for several years, but was eventually also arrested in 1956. McGinnis was sentenced to life in prison, but died behind bars in 1966. So while he may have pulled off the crime of the century, his legacy was kind of a cautionary tale about the fleeting nature, even in success. Now on to Stanley Gus Gascoria, named Gus because Napoleon wouldn't fit his stature. He was the muscle, and he was also the alibi provider for Boston's most infamous cash grab. Born in 1919, Gus had been living the gangster life since his early teens, perfecting that rugged, I definitely shouldn't be trusted look. Come January, he strolled into the Brinks vault alongside his pals, armed, masked, and confidently, maybe not, more quiet than confident, contributing to the seamless theft of millions. But here's where his cinematic arc takes a detour. He was arrested in Pennsylvania in 1950 for another burglary. He was declared medically unfit right before the trial in Boston. In July of '56, months before he'd face justice, he suddenly kneeled over in prison from a brain tumor. Talk about timing. No courtroom drama, no life sentence, just an early exit to the criminal stage left with no cameo in the end credits. Gus's story, ambitious, audacious, ultimately deflated literally. And that's it for episode 1 of Insane Heists and Robberies. Next time we'll dive into another jaw-dropping tale of ambition, hubris, and general idiocy, with a side of poorly thought out criminal behavior. I'm Corey Adam, and I'm reminding you, crime may not pay in the long run, but it definitely comes with a wild ride, some amazing headlines, and the occasional unscheduled visit from the FBI. And hey, if you ever find a rusted out heater filled with 1950s cash, call the authorities. Or call me first and we'll split it. Allegedly. Until then, stay suspicious, stay sarcastic, and stay the hell away from anyone who calls themselves Specs. Peace out.